How are you, man? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record with a past guest of the Virtual Memories Show to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic. As far as how I'm doing, okay. Got a late start this morning, kind of beating myself up about that already, and I understand I got to get over that because things are weird and getting weirder, and I really can't afford that sort of spiral, you know? Memorial Day weekend is coming up. This is Thursday. I have no idea what anybody's plans are. I am not planning on going to the beach or anything that involves going anywhere, frankly. I haven't gone anywhere in several months, but I did plot out a new half marathon course through my town here that would enable me to loop all three of our major lakes. No one has ever brought this up as a possibility or something that anyone should even bother doing, but I looked it up on Google Maps yesterday, kind of rooted the whole thing out, and it turns out from my house to cover Skyline, then Erskine, then Cupsall Lake comes out to about 13.2 miles. I might save that for later in the summer as a weird challenge to myself. If I'm feeling wacky and fit enough on Memorial Day, I'll give it a shot. You'll find out next Tuesday, I suppose. Anyway, let's get to today's guest. Peter Trachtenberg is joining me this time from his home in the Catskills. Peter is a really fine author of a couple of great memoirs, Another Insane Devotion and The Book of Calamities. There's a third, earlier one that I haven't read yet called Seven Tattoos, a memoir in the flesh. It's on my shelves from when we were getting together the first time. I just never got around to that one, but really enjoyed the subsequent two. Now, Peter teaches writing at the University of Pittsburgh, where until after this semester, he was the director of the writing program. We met during a podcast drop-in that I did at Bennington College's low-res MFA program a bunch of years ago, where he's among the core faculty. We talk about that first encounter during this conversation. He's a good writer and a very thoughtful guy, which we talk about during this conversation. Thoughtful in a way that somehow got me more depressed over the course of it, which leads to the caveats. The audio is fine, a little echoey on his side. My vibe was weird for this conversation yesterday. I'm not sure what was up. Might just, again, be his thoughtfulness and his perspective and how it evokes some of the more apocalyptic thinking I've been going through lately. This does at times just feel like a couple of guys shooting the breeze, and I decided that's just fine. That's what I'm giving you this time around. Oh, and when Peter refers to the Doghouse Band, that is the musicians among the Bennington low-res MFA faculty who play every semi-annual session of the program. They live in a bunch of the faculty live in a house that permits pets, like Amy Hempel's gorgeous doggos, and they brought their instruments and they play, and they include Peter and David Gates, who was the guy who kind of introed me to this whole world, James Wood, the critic, who is a great drummer, Sven Berkertz, and others. I got to see him play once, and it was a lot of fun. This podcast sure has taken me a lot of places I never expected. Here's me and Peter. How are you dealing? How are things, and how have you gotten more acclimated or less?
I would say, I'm startled by how well I'm dealing, actually. Some of it is I'm used to living with a certain degree of fear. I just wrote an essay that is not primarily about my relation to the pandemic. It's about rereading Pale Horse, Pale Rider during it, the Catherine Ann Porter novella.
Which I've never read, but now I feel guilty about.
It's great. Well, it's going to be, I'm delivering it, or it's been delivered as a Zoom file for the Bennington no residency.
Yeah, you got from low res to no res.
Yeah. And one of the sort of my tangential observations in it is that most Americans are actually more afraid of going broke than of COVID. And one of the things is that we can't, at least I can't really internalize or conceive of what it would be like to die completely alone without even somebody to hold my hand. And at the same time being one of thousands of people who were dying that day, some a statistic. Whereas as an American, I have a lifetime of experience with the fear of poverty, of being rendered broke by, the loss of a job or illness that isn't covered by my health plan. I mean, that's the normal state of, say, 99% of Americans.
Yeah. It reminds me of a Bukowski line, which I guess may be distilling Catherine Ann Porter through this, that in America, money is more serious than death.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole rhetoric right now is the rhetoric of they're demanding that they, by which I mean the administration and its allies and its beneficiaries, are demanding that all of us be prepared to sacrifice. And rather than say sacrifice for them, they're sacrificing for some mythical notion of America. And it rhymes with something, the flu pandemic of 1918 coincided with the closing months of World War I. And the Wilson administration did not want it publicly discussed. They didn't want to dampen enthusiasm for the war effort. And they got essentially the press to play along. I mean, if you look at headlines from the period, everything to do with the war is in, 24-point type.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And stuff having to do with it wasn't even called influenza till quite late. It was called the grippe at first, with 2 P's and an E, French spelling, is maybe in a 10-point. Or else it was buried in the middle of the book.
Yeah, Michael Tisserand just did an article about how contemporary cartoonists are dealing with COVID in daily comic strips, and contrasting that with 1918 when no one made any reference to it, partly because one of their peers had been jailed, like an editorial cartoonist had been jailed or arrested and charged for talking about this and, wrecking public morale. So.
Oh, wow. Well,
I'll send that over to you once we finish up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, they haven't gotten to that yet. I mean, they'd like to probably. I mean, the thing is that one of the benefits we have over 1918 is that the media landscape is so fragmentary and so disparate that it's possible for all sorts of countervailing voices to emerge and to be heard. I mean, the problem with it is that some of those voices are those of of COVID quacks or COVID cranks or denialists.
Yeah, I think you get the double whammy of that plus the, you can neutralize an idea just by not forbidding it, just letting it get out there. The way, under the Soviets, samizdat, was sacred, basically, to the literature that was banned by the government meant something because it was banned. That can take you down a slippery slope of whether it's better to live rebelling under an authoritarian regime or free. But that's just a complete side argument that Philip Roth had with George Packer many, many years ago. But yeah, that profusion, that fragmentation does allow more freedom. Like you were saying, the ideas can at least get out there.
Yeah.
I've been on my own for quite a while, so I tend to ramble and rant. I apologize.
No, don't. It's like, this is the kind of discussion, if I didn't have headphones on and we weren't recording, we would just go back and forth for an hour.
Yeah. That's the face-to-face versus remote aspect that's just killing me, But someday you and I will be able to sit down, not have a beer because we're both dry, and just shoot the breeze about this stuff. So. But tell me about both that essay and working, educating, finishing out a semester under such radically changed circumstances.
Well, I was directing the writing program at my university at the time. I've now stepped down from my position or been relieved of it after doing it for 4 years. So I had to supervise our transition to remote teaching. and we were given this mandate to do it. We were given bewildering instructions of various ways in which to do it, whether to do it synchronously or asynchronously. I found it fairly easy to make the adaptation because I'd already used Zoom, and I was already using educational software, which I don't especially like, but it's a convenient way for, say, delivering announcements and receiving assignments, but it's not a substitute for actually being in the room together.
Sure.
But I did find, first off, I was conscientious about communicating with students, which evidently a lot of instructors at many institutions don't do. And even saying that I don't know quite what's happening, but I'll keep you informed as I find out. Mm-hmm. Which I think is quite important. Better to tell somebody you don't know than to just leave them to guess.
Yeah. Do you feel the students handled this better than you might have handled it when you were their age?
I was startled. I was really struck by how conscientious most of them were. I was prepared, for attendance to go way down. I was teaching an undergraduate capstone course with 19 people, which is too many. And I would say that I had 18 regularly attending. I made allowances. I announced that really I was not going to require the full number of assignments. I understood that this was difficult for people, but I would do what I could to give people breaks. I consider we did give students the option of taking pass-fail. I was inclined to give everybody an A just for sort of, toughing it through. But then I also felt that I had students who did really outstanding work, and I felt, I wanted to recognize their distinction. So I did have probably I bumped people's grades up, but there was still some variation in grades.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know how I would have coped or dealt back then. Obviously a different world. If you took Gil of that era into contemporary era, things would be weird also. But yeah, I just couldn't imagine having to transition like that middle of the year and, keep some degree of continuity and learning. But not just because of the change in milieu, but with everything going on the outside. Yeah.
It also, for a lot of these students, it means moving back in with their parents. Before the summer. And these are juniors and seniors, who are making the gradual transition away from living under the parental umbrella. It's more gradual than it was for my generation because, it was possible to get a shitty job out of college and live by yourself in a shitty apartment.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of, one of our mutual friends mentioned that you were working on something about your New York years.
I'm working on a book about, I used to live in a building called Westbeth. It's actually a complex of buildings, and it is one of the first
I think I recorded there once.
You did? Huh.
I think with Shannon Wheeler. Is it an artist's sort of?
It's an artist's housing project or housing estate.
West Village?
In the meatpacking district. It occupies a square block between Washington and West and Bank and Bethune, which is why it's called Westbeth. And it's a building, it opened, it was a former Bell Labs that became an apartment, was converted to housing in the late 60s, through a partnership between the Kaplan Foundation and the forerunner of the NEA, the National Arts Council for the Arts, which later became the NEA. And they moved in, or they had space for roughly 340 something artists in different disciplines. And many of those people have remained there. A number of them have died there. But it's now listed as a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement center, which is a trip. And so I'm making it the primary focus of the book that I'm writing, which combines narrative of a friend's suicide in the building, but it's also portraits of artists aging in place. And it's a sort of portrait of what I think is the twilight of Bohemia in New York. I'm actually, one of the things I'm trying to do is find younger people, younger working artists. And I have some former students and friends who will be subjects of it. But it's asking the broader question about what is the value that art has in a society. Do we require artists to be stars, which seems to be the sort of the model that most people recognize now?
Yeah.
Or do we have a place for artists who make good work, who do it steadily, who may have to do other things to make a living, and whose work performs some vital but mysterious function for everybody else?
Yeah. Yeah, it's of a piece with what I was rambling about earlier, that sense of the market permeating everything, that, art is successful if you can make money doing it.
Yeah.
Which, this is my, there is no end game. There is no payoff for my doing this sort of show. I like to have something that is pure amateur enthusiasm, or, something that's done out of love. But for most people, yeah, you're caught in that money bind.
Well, it's a different kind of money bind. We're talking about, if you're a visual artist, you have to have sales like Jeff Koons or Damien Hirst.
Right.
One of the people I'm interviewing he lived for a long time selling paintings, but he was selling them for maybe 1,000 a piece, and he'd sell 4 to 6 a year.
Right. Yeah, it's a different world.
Yeah.
When I was hanging out in the lobby waiting for this guest was visiting the guy I recorded with, so it must have been his girlfriend who actually had the place at Westbeth. I recall a lot of elderly people coming and going through the lobby. So I'm fascinated by this topic now and dying to read what comes out of it.
Well, you know what it is? It's actually, when I wrote the pitch, it's basically like just Alta Caucus. It's like
I didn't want to say, but yeah, that's pretty much what it looked like.
Although, I am including younger people. I don't want it just to be elderly artists.
Yeah.
And, I would say it's, the challenges. The thing about New York was that for a long time, even though it was an expensive city, there were always crevices that you could find for yourself, sort of like a cockroach. And there were neighborhoods that hadn't been gentrified, or there were apartments that were, cruddy enough that the rent wouldn't break you, and you could get not necessarily a menial job, but a
job that would cover things. Yeah.
Yes.
That would allow you to do your thing.
Yeah. I worked as a temp for years, and I remember my first job that was even tangentially related to what I wanted to do was for Poets and Writers in the nonprofit. And I got $3.25 an hour plus, I think I got medical. At the time, there was no sick days. You would get comp time, but you didn't get sick pay.
Yeah.
And I was able to live in an apartment in Chelsea.
Yeah. It's when you try and explain that to people, it's like with Fran Lebowitz when she got to New York. I think she was living in Hell's Kitchen, and one weekend driving a cab covered her rent for the month. That was, doable. And then she could spend the rest of the time, as she put it, goofing off and reading and smoking. But yeah,
have you interviewed her? That's fantastic.
Oh God, no, I'm dying. She is on my Mount Rushmore list to get. I was hoping, that was a casualty of COVID. Ben Catcher, the cartoonist and writer. Yeah, who just did a great book about the history of dairy restaurants. He and Fran did an event at the Strand, but it was a day or two after things had already gone sideways, like March 12th or 13th. And I was like, I can't go into New York and risk this. I had gotten back from Japan a few weeks earlier on a business trip. Everything my wife and I were both considering luck. We managed not to pick up anything. We're still doing okay. going into New York and doing that, while it would have given me the opportunity to meet Fran and Pitcher on the show, I just couldn't risk my life to do that.
I think I may have been in New York that day, actually. It may have been my last time in the city, or around then.
Yeah, my last was the weekend before. March 7th, I did 2 podcasts and the Antiquarian Book Fair. Both of the podcasts ended up positive within like 10 days.
Wow.
So, yeah, the guys I was dealing with at the book fair came through just fine. So I'm hoping it wasn't me. But yeah, it's New York. I mean, we're going to look back at particularly that 1 month stretch where things got really hairy. And yeah, I don't know what scarring that's going to cause on our psyches, even both of us at a distance from this, a physical remove. I mean, yeah, speaking of, how is the vibe in Pittsburgh in terms of
Pittsburgh? I mean, I'm not there at the moment. I'm in Catskill, where we bought a house this year.
Okay.
But in Pittsburgh, there was a quarantine that is now relaxing. The city is on yellow, but most people are staying at home. Very few businesses are open. People are walking around. Somebody told me the other day that they'd taken a walk and nobody on the street was wearing masks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a recurring vibe from my New York and Philadelphia, my urban guests, basically, that some neighborhoods, they're just squirming because they're trying to walk by people who are not taking precautions.
Yeah, I mean, I had somebody yell at me the other day in their car because I was on my bike and I didn't have a mask on. And, I felt shamefaced. I'm not.
Yeah. I know it's problematic, different circumstances. I run every other day, but I do so early in the morning, and I live out in the woods, so it's pretty isolated. But a pal of mine in Boston posted his most recent run in a mask, with the pollen and everything else. It is the only way our times get remotely close, because he's normally so much faster than me. But I was like, oh, Raman came in much slower. I'm glad the mask is slowing him down. He can't breathe as well.
The mask is slowing him down? Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So at least I get a little bit of solace out of that. But speaking of solace, but besides the Catherine Ann Porter, has there been other reading that's either helped or, driven you further down the rabbit hole of outrage? I'm hoping for solace
reading
as
too
opposed
much
to
of
outrage.
My ongoing struggle is not to read the news first thing, to meditate or stretch or do something before I start looking at my phone. Mm-hmm. Because that sends me into just, this unending cycle of fury.
Yeah. I have the Instagram okay, Twitter not okay first thing in the morning. Instagram's okay because it's just pictures and people probably aren't raging too hard. Twitter is just the rage feed, so I stay away from that for a little while. But
yeah, I'm not interested. You see, I'm rarely interested in other people's pictures. I'm not even that interested in Twitter, frankly, although I follow Bette Midler.
Well, you should, yeah.
Yeah, and whose outrage is at least funny.
Yeah. But staying off of the rage machine in general is
it's difficult because it's also, first off, because it is addictive. I wrote about this years ago. When I was reading Proust, 2009, I think, I decided to read the entire Remembrance of Things Past. Yeah. And I would read it for an hour every morning and an hour at night. And the great struggle every morning would be to just read it and not look at my phone.
Yeah.
And the thing was, then it wasn't even, we weren't living in an emergency as we are now.
But yeah, there's that instant, it's sort of why a Kindle works better than an iPad in some respects, because you can't do anything but read with it.
Yeah.
You could really work at it to try to check email through the thing, but it's more of a hassle than it's worth. So having a dumber device or an actual just physical book has got to be better. But
yeah,
do you have oh, sorry, go on.
No, I have an iPad that I haven't used probably in 2 or 3 years, and I just read books. I would use the iPad if I were traveling.
Yeah.
But I prefer, reading print on a page. And I prefer being limited to what else I can do.
Right.
If I want to check my email, I have to go to a device.
Yeah, I have an analog desk in my office where there are no devices or anything. When I sit down there to write in my journal in the morning, there is no idly clicking something and, reading. There's just this little notepad and a pen, and that's it. And it helps to have islands like that, I think. But do you have you mentioned meditating. Do you have a practice?
I have a practice that is erratic or has become erratic. What I was doing for a long time was I would either meditate first thing in the morning or I would read Primo Levi in Italian out loud. And I would do it. It would slow me down. And because my Italian is pretty good, but it's not so, it is poor enough that I'm conscious of every word. Mm-hmm. So I would be reading in a, kind of like the way you do as a kid. And I also think the periodic table is one of the great spiritual texts, although it wasn't conceived as such.
Which I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read, but
you would actually,
I have it here on the
shelf. Appreciate it as somebody who works even tangentially in the sciences, because it's on one level about his education as a chemist. Each essay or story, it was published as fiction, but I've actually taught it as a memoir or autofiction or a fabulous memoir. Is named after one of the elements, which either figures directly or metaphorically in the essay.
Yeah, I've got it on the shelf, and everything about it says, "Gee, Gil, this would be perfect for you." But yeah, there's that.
And it's also just really, it is very soothing and funny and moving to read.
Well, I always like coming out of these with yet more book recommendations as opposed to yet more indications that I've squandered my time. So this is good. The other question, I guess, how is the Bennington no-res program, besides going no-res, adapting? How are you planning on
Well, we will be teaching our workshops by Zoom. They are trying to replicate it as closely as possible the feel of a workshop. So there are lots of, we're pre-recording our lectures, but I think our readings will be live.
Yeah.
And then there are a number of visitors, and then we have obligatory meetings with our students. I mean, the most painful sacrifice is a lack of a live workshop or a face-to-face workshop. Well, it will be face-to-face, but it'll be mediated by a screen.
Yeah.
And then the fact that, the Doghouse Band won't play. I mean, I suggested put it this way, if the Rolling Stones could do it from their living rooms, separate living rooms, we ought to be able to do like one song.
Oh, Monday's guest, Gary Clark, he was a musician, started in the 80s with a pop band called Danny Wilson. But he wrote the music for the movie Sing Street, which just got adapted to a musical that was going to debut on Broadway in mid-April. The cast really wanted to do a live stream of a bunch of the songs from the musical. And the act of technological coordination to pull that off, something that would seem like it could work pretty easily, the little tiny fragmentary delay and latency from person to person makes it very, very difficult to actually pull off. But when you're the Doghouse Band, that could work a little to your benefit, I guess, if everybody's just slightly off time, It would drive James Wood nuts, I guess.
It would drive James nuts, yeah. It's like okay for everybody but the drummer.
Yeah, that was Gary's thing. He had to do this hi-hat thing to keep everybody's time so that they could see where it was, and they pulled it off. But yeah, we're all adapting, I guess, as I'm doing right now with this stuff instead of driving all over creation to driving up to Bennington, for example, to record with David Gates and then end up meeting you and building that whole tree of podcast guests. Is there a place you really want to get to, want to drive to or go, or is it just getting back to New York?
Well, I would really like to go back to New York. I mean, particularly, the people I'm interviewing, there are people who it is not safe for them to come there. One of the people I just finished after about hour-long interviews is 95.
Oof. Yeah.
And it's sort of amazing. I mean, he walks a mile every day.
Yeah. But it's just you create a risk for them. I haven't seen my father since the beginning of February. Yeah.
My greatest fear would be to inadvertently contaminate, infect somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. How does this mirror or not mirror your experience? You were in New York during the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
When AIDS first broke. I mean, it's an ongoing crisis, but does this have parallels, or is it distinct enough given the type of transmission and everything else and the broader demographic and everything? Tell me, how much thought have you put into?
Well, I actually have put in a great deal of thought, because the essay, the book that I'm writing deals at least tangentially with AIDS, and AIDS will be certainly one of the themes given where Westbeth is located and given the fact that a lot of the people I'm interviewing are queer. Mm-hmm. The thing with AIDS was, I mean, you contracted it in two ways. You contracted it either by sex or by doing IV drugs. I probably, because I was sexually promiscuous, though I was heterosexual, and I was an IV drug user, I was constantly, I just lived with the terror that I was going to have to at one day call all the women I'd had sex with and tell them that I had HIV, that I had infected them.
And in comparison,
but there was not that. Pardon?
Yeah, I was going to say, in comparison, this is so much more easily transmitted.
This is so much more easily transmitted. I think people in New York know enough to. I'm sure there are people. As far as I know, there have been no nudnik demonstrations by anti-lockdown activists in New York City. No, because anybody
South Jersey, our musclehead contingent down south part of the state, yes, but New York City, no.
And Albany has had them.
Yeah.
The thing is, in New York, people realize they're not the only people are the very rich who have left for Mustique or something, or New Zealand.
Yeah. There is that stat on the number of, I think they used the USPS forwarding records to figure out people who've left New York to bug out, and it's particular neighborhoods, and they tend to be the wealthier ones where people have another home to go to.
Yeah, I was asking one of the people I was interviewing in Westbeth about, 2 blocks to the south of Westbeth, there are a pair of glass towers that were built by Richard Meyer. Mm-hmm. Lou Reed used to live in one of them. And for all I know, Laurie Anderson is still there. And the guy said they're really empty. They're just there for their investment apartments, mostly foreign money.
Yeah, I don't think that's any different before or after the pandemic. I think those were largely places to shield your cash if you're
I would approve of a movement to just occupy those apartments.
I'm hip. So summer, as this stretches on, do you have, besides finishing the book, further go, or what is the book timeline, I guess?
The book is just starting now. I just got the contract. Yeah. And really what my plan had been to go into the city every day, get a commuter ticket, spend the day in interviews, and then going home. And so far I'm just working with people I've been introduced to. Yeah. And I actually am surprised that we have built up some continuity and ease with each other on the phone or FaceTime. Yeah. It's not the same as being able to see them in person. Mm-hmm. I hope continue to get other people to interview. Probably most of the summer will be interviewing rather than writing. I'm still working on a novel.
The Ulysses S. Grant one or something else?
Yeah, the Grant one.
Okay. So there is continuity in our lives. Good.
Yeah, at least it's the main form of continuity. And I guess I'm planning my fall courses and teaching my summer ones. I go to online yoga classes, which are not the same as a live one, but it's still it's the thing of being in a room, whether it's real or virtual, and doing the same thing at the same time with a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the value of face-to-face classes.
Yeah, I mean, I went to St. John's College, that Great Books program where everything is about the in-person conversation, and they've said that they're amazed at how well the transition to online went, but I just couldn't imagine just the vibe of sitting in the room on those woven straw chairs and talking to people and discussing the books versus looking at a bunch of different tiles and waiting for someone to stop so you can jump in and yeah, I just don't know. I don't know how we adapt so quickly and whether it's a false sense of adaptation where we think it's the same, but we're not even aware of what we're lacking or what we're missing out on.
Well, it's sort of the equivalent of like how a cat will go, I have cats who were outdoor cats originally, then became indoor cats, and they're now becoming indoor, outdoor again. But they transitioned from hunting real rodents to, I have one who would get one of my slippers, who will walk up and down the stairs with one of my slippers in her mouth, yowling, the way cats do when they catch something.
Yeah.
And it didn't take her that long to make that transition.
Maybe that's just wired into their brains at this point. Just find the house, get in there, and yeah. Now, do you have any, I don't know if you're a TV person at all. Are you doing any sort of binging of TV or movies?
I wouldn't say binging. I mean, my partner and I were watching BoJack Horseman, which we love, really like. I was watching Fleabag before this happened, and I'd like to start watching that. But I mean, I'm really busy. I've been working till 11 at night.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm also doing chores. We bought a house. So it was like yesterday I was weeding and scraping old paint off a shed. Mm-hmm. And as a result of which, my arthritic shoulder is killing me today.
So I'm giving you a little bit of a break. That's something.
Yeah.
Last question. Graduation by video. Did that work?
It worked. I would say, for at the University of Pittsburgh, where I presided over two, it's interesting. There was an undergraduate graduation, like the general English department graduation, and that was all we just recorded videos, and it's there as a asynchronous file that people can access. Mm-hmm. But the MFA graduation was live. I was so paranoid about Zoom bombing that I had a waiting room, and I installed a waiting room, and I asked to try to get emails of all the expected guests so I could clear people in advance. Yeah. And that was great. I mean, that was really, really quite moving. Everybody read their work, about 5 minutes of their work. And one feature of Zoom that I ordinarily find hugely irritating, the chat, It was absolutely terrific in this context because there was just this outpouring of love and appreciation from, teachers, friends, and colleagues and peers.
That's neat. It's sort of, you see that with people who you can more spontaneously just, throw something out there in that format, I guess. Yeah.
I usually find it terrifically irritating, but,
yeah.
In this context, I went, oh God, it's great. Yeah.
Well, when we first started and you didn't have your headphones weren't picking up my side, I was going to hit the little chat window to tell you that I was talking and then realized that wasn't going to solve anything. So, I figured it's for the best if we just, if I kept shouting until you finally plugged in the headphones in a different format. But yeah, we've all had to become technicians as part of this whole transition in a weird way. But anyway, last words, messages, anything you want to
There's
say to
somebody
people
actually who I think you should interview, and I'll try to set it up for you. A former student of mine, and who I just interviewed for Scoundrel Time, named Tracy O'Neill, who has a really good novel out now called Quotients.
That name's familiar. I may have seen it on the Bennington Instagram feed. Because I don't
think so. I taught her at City College. She was in the MFA program at CCNY.
Huh. I'll have to look it up. The name
really
or the title
writer.
of the book seems familiar. So, cool.
Yeah. She just did an event at the Center for Fiction.
Mm-hmm. Oh, maybe that's it. I'm on their email list too. But anyway, it's one of those things where I'm trying to transition from doing the check-in podcast with past guests into sitting down with new people, even though I hate the idea of my first conversation with someone being virtual instead of in person. But,
Are you are you working at your job now?
Oh God, I represent companies that manufacture drugs and vaccines for pharma companies. So yeah, I'm a little busy. That's there's a lot of lobbying work going on, a lot of information sharing, surveying, working with various members, working with the feds, working with academic institutions. Yeah, I've got a lot. The solace I take in that is that I am playing some minuscule role in helping get us past this. So while I'm doing the podcast, which helps me keep my sanity and according to some listeners has helped them, the day job I do actually has some merit and importance in terms of the immediate thing we're going through, which makes me feel like, okay, I'm a contributing member of society and I'm not, a scumbag lobbyist, although, I am a lobbyist, which comes close to scumbag by definition. Nonetheless, I feel like I'm doing something positive. So.
When do you think that there's
we're not going anywhere for a year and a half?
Yeah.
My belief is at least a year and a half because of the time to really develop vaccines, actually manufacture them, which people are now starting to realize does not happen instantly, distribute them, and then actually generate the immune reaction that takes time to build up to the point at which people are comfortable traveling. I don't know anything, but the vibe I get from companies I've spoken to is they don't expect business travel till fall of next year.
I mean, my terror or my fear is that the Trump administration is going to just find a sort of what they decide is an approximation of a vaccine. They will promote it widely and kill not just thousands, but possibly millions of Americans that way.
I have faith. My guys help with the development and manufacturing, but my guys aren't the ones who are inventing the drugs. They're there to do all the technical work and bring it along for them. I have faith in the companies themselves because I know, the guys there actually care, even on the license holder, the drug developer side. But yes, when it comes to this government and its practices regarding hydroxy and everything else, yeah, all bets are off. I would trust some of the scientists, but that's you and I are more punctilious than normal people about, listening to the media and following authority, I guess.
Well, put it this way.
Depressingly horrible note, but
it is a horrible note. It's just what I know is when I don't know enough that I have to trust some kind of authority. I think I'm fairly good at deciding what authorities to trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this has been Oh, go on. Yeah,
I am not a physician, or I'll put it this way: my last science course was 8th grade bio.
Yeah. I get you. I had an orthopedist appointment March 4th, and the nurse was blithe. Oh, this is just going to be like Y2K. I don't think it's going to add up to anything. The orthopedist comes in 2 minutes later and we start talking. He's like, I think it'll be a 70% infection rate globally with millions of deaths. I'm like, yep, that's pretty much what I'm thinking. So let's both use that hand sanitizer and make sure we're, keeping up and not having too much contact. And that was a week before in America, things really went sideways. But nobody knows anything. That's the big lesson, or that the models require constant revision as there's more data coming in. It's not a static structure. So it makes things really challenging because our brains are wired to want a conclusion as opposed to open-endedness. It's weird, but one of the things I watched partway through, a few weeks into this, I was clicking around and Soderbergh's adaptation of Solaris was on.
Oh yeah,
and
I never saw it, but
it's not great. It gets a little 2001-y. It's very different than the Tarkovsky version, which is very different than Lem's novel, which I have weirdly turned into a touchstone in my life, solely about the ineffability of human relationships. But Clooney's character has a dream where he sees the scientist he was coming to meet at the station who killed himself before Clooney arrived. And the character tells him, you want answers, but there are no answers. There are only choices. Mm. And it just struck me so heavily. And I know you could just, that's a cliche, goofy line, but where we are right now, yeah, we don't have anything conclusive. We have to continually make choices about how we live and how we live with others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the state of not knowing is a very difficult state to maintain.
Yeah. The fog of war. I mean, every scenario we're in like that, we jump to these absurd conclusions that we look back at and ascribe to either someone else or we were all confused at the time, but it's all us, you know?
Yeah, it is.
Well, thanks for depressing the hell out of me, Pete.
Great. I'm thrilled to have done my job.
I sort of feared that. That's why I have the great spreadsheet of everybody who said yes to do this. I'm like, I know the conversation with Peter's going to be a little heavy, and, you know, I'll balance that with some of the other ones that I know it's people who are taking it a little more lightly, or at least haven't had the experience you've had going through a lot of
well, on one level, I take it quite lightly. I mean, it's like, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die. If I'm going to be broke, I'm going to be broke.
Yeah. But you also think a lot in ways that I fall into the same sort of patterns. And I guess that's why I'm glad Gates introduced us. Actually, I don't think Gates even introduced us, although those years ago at Bennington, I think you happened to walk up while Gates and I were coming out of the dining hall. Yeah. And you talked about Keith Richards' memoir or autobiography. And that was my moment of, that guy sounds pretty interesting. We should have some conversation. And we should have more. Hopefully, well, with hope, another year or so.
Are you going to talk with Gates? Is he?
I pitched him. He says he doesn't have headphones or a mic or the technical inclination to figure out what the hell he would need to do this. So I'm just going to send him your episode when it airs. And that way he'll say, oh, that's what Gil's doing. Okay. And we'll leave it at that. I'd love to get him to talk for half an hour or so, but, you know, I just figure the possibility of him, you know, hitting a bunch of buttons, trying to get the headphone input and all that to work is going to be kind of tough. But, you know, we'll see. Anyway, we'll talk soon, but is there a timeline for the Westbeth book? You mentioned
I have a contract with Black Sparrow is doing it. I hope it'll come out like the beginning of 2023.
Cool. I will help with people I can connect you with.
Shockingly far from now. I figured that if I work on it, if I'm really good, I can finish the manuscript by the end of next year.
Mm-hmm. I will help you with leads, and you know, if there's stuff I can do 25 miles away from New York that helps.
If you know any, you know, particularly younger,
that's my connection,
or artists who are in the city, don't have money, you know, who are sort of scraping together livings, that would be great, because I'm interested in those people. I'm interested in what people are doing now.
I'll connect you with a couple I know. You know Molly Crabapple?
Not personally, but I know who she is, yeah.
Okay, because she sort of fits in there, although she makes a living through the art. But yeah, I'll try to hook you up with her and some other people who I think would be a benefit.
That'd be great.
Cool, man. Stay safe. You know,
and
don't
if you're
hurt your
interested in talking with at the point when you're interested in talking with Tracy, let me know and I'll introduce you guys.
Yeah, I've got her written down in my little, I keep a list of notes now while we're talking, and I have action items, which I know sounds very corporate and business-like, but I've got 3 down there for you, including Tracy O'Neill. So cool.
Awesome.
I look forward to it. Again, stay safe, and I hope we get to sit down in person someday soon.
Sei gesund.
Be well, Peter. Thanks so much.
Be well.
And that was Peter Trachtenberg. Go check out his books like Another Insane Devotion and The Book of Calamities, which you can order through IndieBound, bookshop.org, or your favorite bookstore. His not too up-to-date website is petertrachtenberg.com, which is petertrachtenberg.com. I'll spell it out later, or I'll put links to it on the show and episode notes, along with Peter's Twitter, which is tshakti, TSHAKTI. His Instagram is Peter Trachtenberg, all one word. Doesn't post to that too much, as he talks about during the episode. Anyway, like I say, links to all that stuff will be in the show notes, along with links to his teaching roles at Bennington and Pitt, his books, etc. Now, we should be back tomorrow with another COVID check-in if today's session works out. If you want to send me a little update to read on the air or have something you want to share with the listeners, let me know and we'll set something up. I'm at groth18, GROTH18 at gmail.com. You can find contact info at our websites, vmspod.com and chimeraobscura.com/VM. And you can find a link to the COVID-19 sessions at both sites with all of these daily episodes. You can also just subscribe to the Virtual Memory Show via iTunes, Spotify, or whatever your podcatcher of choice is. The RSS feed's available on both sites. And that way you can make sure you get access to every episode, and you can also go through the archives at the sites or through your subscription to get all 370 in-person episodes along with all these COVID sessions. So in the before time, all of these were recorded in person, but nowadays, of course, I have to record remotely. And to do that, I'm using Zencastr.com. That's Zencastr. If you're interested in it. So Zencastr with no final E. There's a free hobby level you can use, as well as a pro level that's $20 a month and gives you higher quality audio at the end, lets you bring in more participants. I like to stick to one-on-one myself, but maybe at some point down the line, I'll get a whole bunch of people together to shout at me or something. Anyway, my Patreon supporters more than cover the expense of adding Zencastr to my web hosting service, especially because I'm no longer driving into the city and covering tolls and parking and subway rides and all that stuff for a lot of those in-person shows. So what I'm saying is, if you can spare anything, don't give me any money. Go to the Patreons, Kickstarters, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, tip jars, whatever, for the artists and writers you like, and show them some support. There are a lot of other people who aren't in creative fields who are also looking for help right now. If you know one of them, help them. If you don't feel comfortable giving to individuals and you'd rather give to charities, there are a lot of them out there. I suggest your local food bank, but there are plenty of places that you can go to help people in need. Now, I am Gil Roth. It is May 21st, 2020, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memory Show podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Keep the conversation going, stay safe, and wash your damn hands.